So the next part is, when we exit a deal, it's often not what we thought when we first bought the note, right? Or created a note. I'd like to hear some stories about your first problem when you finalize a deal, what went wrong, or what would you do differently now that would have prepared you better for that, or maybe something you would have put in place to protect you, what you do now. What did you do in the beginning that you would do better now, that maybe your first 2 or 3 deals, something went at the end of it and you're like, crap, that REO or that performing note, or structuring a JV deal, even like, what would you do differently now if you restarted today? Cayce, what are your thoughts?
Well, again, I want to go back to one thing you said a second ago to that. You mentioned having a good system. My wife always asks me in the morning, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? I don't know. It's on my calendar. Like I intentionally don't try to remember a lot of things. I have a process to remind me.
Yes.
Because I don't need to internalize it. I'll drop it. If
Totally.
my whole team knows if they want to meet with me, it's got to be on my calendar. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. Same thing with my day-to-day tasks and calls and things. It's all in my CRM. I don't know who I'm calling that morning when I get to my desk. It's in my system.
Yep.
Yeah.
And my thing that I joke with, if people ask a question, is it in Salesforce? Because then we know. Otherwise, it's not happening.
Yep.
Have a process. So totally agree. Two things that, exiting deals, we hold our notes. We don't really sell them. I guess we do get some back when we have to go through foreclosure. I had one recently where we didn't do the paperwork right initially because we only looked at the
paperwork.
The deed of trust and the note. Both were standard, but they weren't as comprehensive as needed. And we had to foreclose. And when the borrower moved out, ended up leaving 2 RVs and a mobile home on property. But we didn't have personal property listed in our deed of trust, so we couldn't dispose of them. We couldn't get rid of them. And it took me a while going through a court system with our attorney to be able to get those through the DMV, moved over, and et cetera, et cetera. That slowed down my ability to flip that back into a new note and get these things off my plate. And so again, looking back, I wish I had, instead of trying to come up with my own paperwork, gone to some people into a network to get some of those things. But yeah, most of ours, again, my disposition on them is getting into a note. So I would definitely say correct underwriting of having the right buyers is so important. Oh, another thing that I would say, I've had some people that are in my shoes that when they're selling them, they'll go and let their borrower even finance their down payment over a short period of time, or do something super creative to help them get into the home. And that only bites everybody in a keister later. That's not a good answer because they can't afford it. And, I know you think you're helping them again. I've had friends do that are in a pickle later. So yeah, I definitely knowing who is in the home and waiting till you have a right borrower for us, because we're originating them.
Yeah. Because you send people up for failure, right? And it just causes more headaches later. And you rush to do it because I got to get this house sold. They want to buy. Let's go for. And at the end of the day, you have to resell it anyway. You have to foreclose on them and the whole process. And you're kicking someone out of their house. It just doesn't feel good.
No.
We wouldn't do it with our children. Why are you doing it with borrowers?
Yeah. And you mentioned that point too on how it feels bad having to foreclose on them. But, I have had a borrower that we had to do that on, I'd say about 2 years ago. And then I talked with her about a year afterwards. And she said, I was really in a house I couldn't afford. I thought I could. Life went crazy. And you actually forced my hand. And I'm still amazed at this conversation. But you forced my hand to go and move into somewhere where I was saving money. And she moved back with family temporarily, got a clean start, and moved on. And I'm like, I think of that now, and that had we just kept kicking the can, should have had a bigger, foreclosure and immediate or inevitable anyways. So letting us just do it earlier, that was one of the epiphanies for us that, we'll do payment plans. We're going to be flexible, but if you don't do your terms and you don't agree to it, we have to move on.
Yeah. So Nathan, what did you learned when you finish a deal and you say, man, I should have done this, I should have done that, or, what could you have done better in the beginning that you know now?
Those first few deals where we were trying to resell them, like I say, our paperwork was just not right. It wasn't correct. And so when that was a big stumbling block, trying to sell those first couple of notes is just, and I think, partially we didn't know what we were doing. Partially we were trying to be creative. We were doing things like you said, Cayce, like the down payment, they couldn't afford to lump sum of it. So, okay, that's fine. Your first 6 months of payments will be this much. And then after 6 months, it goes down to this. We'll count that towards your down payment. Cool stuff, very creative, but ultimately not helpful. So that was the biggest challenge right off the top. Was just making sure that paperwork was correct for that back end, and something I hadn't even thought of, nothing I would have considered before I was creating those notes.
Yeah.
And we're running into that today, where people are creating notes and now they're trying to sell them, and we're going, oh man, this paperwork is a mess. It's not that it's not sellable necessarily, but you're probably not going to like my price,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
am going to have to discount it, because I'm going to have to take some time and energy and legal resources to go and fix that.
Yeah.
And another one that I think I learned when originating them is that we used to try to really get as much as we could from this person, the borrower. And if they have 15 total in their checking account, we were trying to get the 15 is down. And that's not good for them, and it's not good for us. And we really do, and we tell our borrowers that our goal is not to drain all the money that you have available, because moving is expensive.
Yep.
And all their setups and getting utilities and all that stuff. And we used to have, a year ago, new notes would always have a dip, and they'd start off a little bit behind and they'd end up getting current because
Shocker.
they were unexpectedly having more costs in the moving or new furniture or whatever. So now we're like, you know what, we'll go ahead and take 2,500, 3,000, whatever it is, a little bit less on a down. I want you to not be late when the mortgage starts in 2 months. I want you to have money in your pocket, because I want this to be a long-term friendship and not trying to be taking it. That doesn't help anyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what do you
for
got?
me, when we took back a property and learned REO stuff, I didn't realize how big an importance of the area was for me, right? I was looking at tapes and saying that number looks good, and I didn't realize like the area of the property was a key thing, right? We bought in properties, the areas that looked good, but I didn't really understand the area, right? A lot of us were in Columbus, Ohio when we first started. It was a big area for no buyers, whatever happened. But there were different sections of Ohio that's more attractive, where, the value of the property is good here, but if you get over here, it's even better. So sometimes you pay up for certain areas. We had some properties where we then couldn't sell it because it was in a bad area. And even though it was, it is what it is, I just didn't learn. But I also had the flip side. We bought a property in New Jersey, Trenton, where it was on 3 streets that were the highest value of the entire city. We just happened to get lucky. But I realized the fact that to start diving in and understand the local area was a key thing for us, because there are plus and minuses of every area, even if it's in the same city. It's really interesting. We've seen pictures also where the front of the house looks beautiful and the back half is gone. Like the whole house is gone, and not really getting a foot on the ground and seeing the property is essential in understanding the process. It's crazy what you don't realize. So how
do you do that, Dave? How do you get that local knowledge without being local?
Right. So there's a couple different ways. When you first got the notes, the biggest question a lot of people say is, well, I don't want to buy outside my local neighborhood.
Yeah.
And then my reverse question is, would you be, if someone came to you and asked you about your local neighborhood, would you be able to tell them? Absolutely. So what I started doing is I started networking with those people who are either A, note buyer, or B, people who help me normally. So I'd go back to the person who helped me sell an REO and say, hey, what do you know about this property over here? And they had a wealth of information. There are local REO agents who can do the rekeying, the winterization, the trash out. They knew their local market much better than any of us would do it, right? I think for me, I learned to use my network that I already built of REO agents to say, hey, listen, would you buy this property? And the answer is, well, yes or no. And then go, why? And they say, well, you don't understand. This is happening over here. There's a huge industrial problem going on. I'd be careful with this. And I started learning about the stuff, and they can go locally and check out things. And sometimes they even knew the house. We're like, oh man, watch out for that problem, right? We looked at a house one time, someone died in. We didn't realize there was a murder scene, right? We just didn't put two and two together.
Yeah,
and you're like, oh, really?
Yeah.
And you have a ton of local note investors who you can reach out to across the country, most of the time in different counties, and say, hey, can you just do a drive-by or let me know the local area? You're more than likely easy. Get on the phone and ask questions. They'll take 5 minutes and just say, yes, great area, bad area. This is the value. It's really awesome. So,
so a little sneak peek coming up later this summer. We've got a special guest coming on where she's going to talk about the network that we can tap into together. So I'll leave it at that, but it's a huge network nationwide, very valuable. We're excited to have her come on here in a couple of months.
Bernard mentioned on the Zoom, on the Facebook feed, I think that he set up Zoom calls with people to see local properties. That's awesome.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, one of the
Casey?
things I love about what you said is that when you ask if they would buy it or not, you followed it up with why. And one of the things we do a lot on our team is ask all the questions you can possibly come up with. Keep asking questions. There's always more to learn. We occasionally we buy anywhere in Texas, and so we buy in the tiniest of town. But one thing I've come to learn over time is I have to account for that in my hold time. To find my end buyer, I've got to buy it better so that I can account for a longer hold. But we use a service like We Go Look, but it works. WeGoLook.com works in some areas and some it doesn't. We now have handy people in different regions, but yeah, you definitely have to know the region. I bought one down by the coast that I thought was an awesome little property, and I was super excited. It took me, I don't even remember, 5-6 months to find a buyer because it was a small town that had 3 people.
Wow. Yeah.
But they all did know who used to live there. They knew the whole backstory, so it's funny. I definitely see that. Another thing, and again, I do a lot when I'm buying them. I've learned a lot about septics and well waters and stuff like that. Has been a bit of a pickle a few times.
Yeah.
I sold one, and we buy sight unseen frequently. For
Yeah.
physically seeing it, we get a lot of photos, and we're going to resell it, and we actually sold it, and then the borrower calls back, say, "Hey, we had our water tested, and it's just not good." And our seller we bought it from lied and misled us, and that was my fault for not doing the due diligence. Yeah, he can lie and do whatever, but I'm the one accountable. So we had to fix that process now, but we had a $30,000 hiccup that we had to go put a filter on that because apparently this well in this part of Amarillo is just dangerous, and I can't let someone live in a house that it's got unhealthy water. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but learned a big lesson that one. And so I should have gone to others that have done properties in that area and say, hey, what do I not know about buying in the rural parts of around the city? But now I know.
Yeah.
So the next question I have for you guys is, what was something you learned that you could never prevented and you just didn't know, even if you put everything in place, you just didn't know, right? You wouldn't have been able to solve it